So what is the Pro Sports Assembly? We're the people who work in professional sports, at teams, leagues, and unions who are committed to the advancement of diverse and inclusive leadership across our industry.
From staff, administrators, and executives to team owners, operators, and innovators, we strive to lead by example.
As a member of the Assembly, you will join industry leaders and gain professional development tools, have access to an exceptional network, be invited to participate in forums and fellowships for professional development, attend exclusive events, and engage in discussions led by industry executives.
So why now? Professional sports is at an inflection point. Our industry has great influence, global reach, and incomparable community impact.
Pro Sports Assembly.
Pro Sports Assembly.
Pro Sports Assembly.
United in Game Plan.
Diverse in Council.
Data found from the 2020 Tides report show that about 1,800 vice presidents and above positions are available at the NBA, NFL, MLS, and MLB team level. Of that, roughly 80% are held by individuals who identify as white males. Our next speaker is actively working to change the tide. Tasked with a unique moment in time to hit the reset button, NFL's first Black president, Jason Wright, is not only tasked with advancing the business of his organization, but taking a critical approach to identifying what DE&I means for his organization internally and externally, and the ways DE&I will best position his organization in the future. But before I turn it over to Len and Jason, we invite your questions. Please submit in the question and answering or chat feature at the bottom of your screen. About halfway through the conversation, we'll stop and share and ask Jason a few questions. To make sure the chat is working, please go there now and tell us where you're viewing from and what organization you represent. Thank you to all who's responding. Now, let me introduce you to Len Perna.
Hi, everybody. My name is Len Perna. I'm the chairman and CEO of Turnkey Search. We are an executive search firm in sports, entertainment, and media for the last 25 years. And honored to be here today with our next guest as part of the Turnkey Talks series. And Turnkey Talks is really just a part of what the Pro Sports Assembly is doing. So more about that later. Today, I'm honored to be with the fairly new 4.5-month-old president of the Washington Football Club, Jason Wright. So let's bring Jason onto the stage, and looking forward to having a great conversation with Jason.
Hi, Len.
How are you? Nice to see you.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm good to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. And, you know, the name of this is Hitting the Reset Button. And there's so many different ways that you are hitting the reset button there. You know, we've got a pandemic going on. We've got a new name for your football club that's in the works. You guys have a new stadium potentially in the works. You're building out a new staff that's in the works. You are the first Black president of an NFL team that's in the works. And so there's just so much going on there. Thank you for your time. Let's just start by talking about what got you interested in moving from McKinsey. Mm-hmm. You're a super sharp guy at McKinsey, and now you're in the rough and tumble world of running an NFL team. Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thanks for having me. It's really cool to hear about the aim and the aperture of this organization, and then the role you all play to support that at Turnkey. I don't think we ever make progress and move towards the goals that the folks in this assembly believe in without intentional effort and investment. And so just appreciate you all for doing that. And this is an example of that. And actually, that's a good bridge to my time at McKinsey. You know, when I was an NFL player for almost a decade, 7 years. And when I retired, the thing that I was always trying to recapture was a platform that was potent and powerful, like the league was, for the ideas, the causes, the things that I cared about, the ability to drive an outsized amount of change on those topics because of who I was or the platform I was associated with. And so when I went to business school to learn from all these greedy people how to make money, I realized that there were businesses like McKinsey, who were the advisors of all the most important organizations around the world, that had a different kind of platform. And that by leveraging the influence of that 100-year-old, incredibly influential firm, I could really drive change on the topics I cared about. And the big passion project for me over my time at McKinsey was racial economic equity. So the idea that if there's truly an equal playing field, economic productivity exists across all census tracts of all people, of all genders, of all types and backgrounds. And for me, I was really able to do that. And so when this popped up, when any opportunity popped up when I was at McKinsey, when search firms like you reached out and said, there's something going on, I always filtered it through the lens of whatever I move to next, does it have an equivalent or more powerful platform for change? Is the reach as broad? Is the stage as bright? Is the capital that I would be able to control and dole out as large? Just for all the things that I cared about from a bigger impact and change standpoint, that's how I viewed everything. And to look at a historic franchise in what I would argue, to detriment of some of the folks on here, is the greatest sports league in the world. A storied franchise in the best sports league in the world, in a city that's transformational and central to the broader cultural dialogue on all topics, in a time where dialogue on race was at its peak, and for an organization that was making credible commitments to change its culture and its trajectory. And I already lived here, I didn't have to move. It felt like the right thing from an ethos and personal perspective. So that's how I landed here, man.
I mean, I think that's a great message. I think a lot of the people tuning in are in our industry, but they might be earlier in their careers. And so you're saying something really interesting, which is don't necessarily just take a job for a paycheck. Look for a platform and a foundation and resources where you can make an impact. And, a lot of people that are NFL football players are thinking, I'm going to go be a coach. Maybe I can someday be a GM. But you were really thinking a lot bigger than that. How did you start to think like that? Talk to some of the younger people in the audience, and how did you develop that kind of, philosophy?
Well, I think one of the great things about being in sports, and right, wrong, or indifferent, a lot of people want to talk to you and be around you. And then you don't have to just be a player. It was an extreme example of me as a player. Local business people, local community leaders, all those folks wanted to meet, talk to you about the sport. But even if you're in ticketing or whatever it is, people want to talk to you because you're associated with a club that they've cared about since they were young, and it's sort of a sexy thing to them. In meeting those people and actually engaging those relationships, it opened up the aperture in my mind as to what was possible, that there were other career paths, that there were other opportunities, for someone with my skills. It actually helped me to get a better lens on my skill set. That, as one person told me, I was more than my legs as a running back, that my ability to communicate, my analytic thinking, all of those things are very valuable in a different way. And so it opened the aperture on what was possible for me. And I suddenly could see myself in different places. And I did some internships and things like that helped me realize that I actually didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, but I knew I wanted to learn how to make money because that's where a lot of impact was driven. And so I went to business school.
I mean, that is the scoreboard, right? Is revenues, expenses, profit is a scoreboard on pretty much any business. And so also just going back a little bit, so you went to Northwestern, you played football there, and then you sort of had to make a decision, am I going to business school? Am I going to law school? Am I going to medical school? What do I want to do? How did you decide the pathway of going to what is one of the top 5 business schools, in the country? How did you do that? Why did you do that?
This is not going to engender confidence in my decision-making as a leader. And I see one of my guys, Hugh, is on. Hugh, plug your ears, man. For as much as I'm pushing our organization to be analytics driven, this was my approach. I had been in Chicago as an undergrad at Northwestern. My wife was at Northwestern as an undergrad. I took the GMAT on a whim because I thought maybe I want to go to business school. I only knew about Chicago, so I applied to Northwestern. I applied to the University of Chicago, which I had actually never heard of. And then I applied to the Thunderbird School of Management and Arizona State, which were in town where I was playing for the Cardinals. And that was it. I only applied to 4 schools just because I knew the area and we figured it would be a good, decent life. It was very non-systematic, but I am grateful that God guided the situation, and I landed at University of Chicago, which was an amazing institution and ultimately was a great decision because for me, it was a hardcore finance, analytics, operationally driven education, steeped in economic theory and free markets. And so I got a really rigorous education, which is what I needed after having spent my time in sports. And so it really prepared me with a base skill set that heading into business and heading into consulting was really helpful. Like I learned how to code and write algorithms in R. I got fluent in building spreadsheets and cash flow models and all of that stuff that often gets passed over in business school now because it's a little bit of a fluffier education. U of C really got me right, and it's benefited me to this day.
Well, I'm going to tell you, that's a great story because sometimes it does happen serendipitously, and to be open to that and to run with it and to make the best of it, it's a great lesson. So let's take it forward now. We'll sort of go past the NFL career and past McKinsey and some of the other things you've done. And you're hitting the reset button now at the Washington Football Club. Let's first start by talking about the staff and how you're looking at your organization, your org charts, your people, because you're the leader of a company now. What are the things that are driving you? What are you spending your time on? What are the priorities?
Yeah, I think, when I first got in, there were sort of 2 big priorities in my mind. One was to operationally understand how we were navigating COVID-19. And I actually expected that to eat up the lion's share of my time, frankly. I didn't really expect to do much of anything else during this season. But thankfully, we already had a great plan in place. Our head trainer and our football staff, along with our head of operations, did what I would consider to be the best job in the league. And it's in the data. We had the least number of player COVID cases in the league. We only had 2 all season long, and they were a guy who was on IR and a guy who was a visiting practice squad tryout. So they nailed it. And so while it was hard, while it required a lot of effort and attention, I didn't need to come up with a strategy, which was wonderful. And the league's support on that was fantastic. And so pivoting to what was the other nearest alligator to the boat was the much documented need for culture change in the organization. And there's a long path that we are now on to establishing a healthy, vibrant culture where people are productive, where people feel valued, where there's grassroots innovation, where the voices from those who are closest to our consumers are lifted up and turned into actual ideas and strategies that we implement, where diverse voices are championed and not marginalized, particularly the voices of women, and that we have just the standard policies, procedures, and practices in place. And we've tried to do as much of that as quickly as possible. But as many of you know, the culture is dependent on the leaders within that organization. And we made some tough decisions to very quickly turn over large portions of our leadership team. I think our executive leadership team is 90% different, 80 or 90% different now in 3-4 months time. And that is very disruptive. And that feels hard for an organization, and it can be scary. But we're already starting to see the fruits of a raised bar on what it means to be excellent in our craft, and a raised bar on what it means to be a supportive colleague, and a raised bar on what it means to communicate across silos, and a raised bar on what it means to develop and nurture people and give them step-up opportunities. And we have a long way to go, but a ton of my effort was spent there and has been spent there, and will continue to be, because that's a multi-year journey. And then beyond that, once we sort of had a little bit in place, started to look at these big, gnarly problems, a new name and identity, getting started on a new venue, and really assessing our business on the core performance measures, ticketing, marketing, sales, and just really understanding where we were at. So, it wasn't until a few months in where I was really diving in on the business hardcore.
There is a business book written by Andy Grove. It's called Only the Paranoid Survive. And he talks about getting through the valley of death as fast as you can to get to the other side. And it's a good lesson, I think, that you just said to everybody, which was, you know what, we knew we needed change, culture change, people change. And so we decided we're going to go all in. We're going to get through it. We're going to hire up this staff. We're going to make this change quickly. And that's a great lesson to learn. Talk a little bit about what are you looking for now when you've been hiring these folks, you know, what are the kinds of things you're hiring for, putting skill sets aside, because those are different for each job, but how do you test those culture pieces?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, on the skill set side, you know, it depends on the role, but in each of those, we're looking for a track record of success. I ask a lot of questions, and I ask my colleagues who are hiring to ask a lot of questions that are effectively case studies. Tell me about a time when you faced this and did this. And I ask lots of, I'm a very annoying interviewer, just a warning to everybody. I actually ask tons of follow-up detailed questions. So if you're to tell me, well, you know, there's this time I built, I built our outbound season ticket marketing plan from scratch when I first joined this organization, and we had 2 employees and it went great. I'll say, oh, that's wonderful. Can you tell me about the first conversation you had with your 2 employees? How did that go? What did you say to her? What did she say back to you? That's what I want to understand, how you work and in your most shining moments, because I want to understand your superpower. And I want everyone to have a superpower that's related to their competence. You don't have to be great at everything, but you need a superpower. And then beyond that, I think there are a few things that we look for. What I've learned is our organizations, as all of you already knew, is that these are smaller organizations. You know, big brand, sometimes big budget, not always, but sometimes big budget,
Yeah.
but itty bitty workforce. Itty bitty workforce. And so every leader, no matter how senior, has to be willing to roll their sleeves up and get scrappy. We need player coaches on the field of play in our businesses. And so there's a strong filter for like, hey, are you going to be able to write your own comms? Are you going to be able to get in the model yourself if you're in finance? Like there's a little bit of that, like you're the CFO, but you gotta do work. And so that's one thing that we look for. And there's a humility that's associated with that. There's a humility that's associated with that. Also looking for people that love to build new things, because, you know, our strategy is not only building our business, our core business back up to where we think it needs to be, but also to innovate new business lines, to think of ourselves broader than a traditional sports franchise, diversify our revenue streams. And so I'm looking for people that are creative and think about broadening the business and aren't afraid to bring forward sort of wild ass ideas and see what sticks. And then the last one is we're really looking for people that are analytic and systematic in their thinking. Doesn't mean we need data nerds all over the place. I'm a data nerd, so I'm always susceptible to that. But it's about being systematic in their thinking, structured in their thinking, being able to be measured and strategic, not because we need pretty PowerPoint slides or nice strategy decks or well-built models, but because this sports life comes at you fast. And we need people that have a grounding and a strategy that allows them to stay calm under pressure and keep their eye on the prize and allow the rest of the organization to orient around and draft off of that stability of leadership. And so that's a little bit of what I've been looking for in the senior leaders that I've been hiring, and hopefully they've been doing the same on down. I don't micromanage them, but I think they are.
So I hear 2 lessons coming out of this. First of all, he's looking for folks that almost are like chess players, being able to click through the different permutations of a decision and do the work before getting to a decision that gets to better decision making. And frankly, a lot of people in sports don't have that kind of discipline, Jason. So that's a very disciplined approach to doing your job. The second learning I heard is if you're going to interview with Jason, you cannot bullshit him because he is going to ask you a lot of very specific questions. And so come prepared, right? Come prepared for the interview so you can go to the 5th question down the rabbit hole and be able to answer that. It's a good thing for people to know.
That's right.
Let's sort of click through now to the next big thing, because, you know, it's called the Washington Football Club right now because we're going to go through this name change. What can you share with us about that? What kind of stresses does that put on you and the organization and your marketing partners and your ticket holders? You got all these stakeholders. And then where is it at, and how do you think the timetable plays out for that?
I mean, it is an immense opportunity and something that's incredibly exciting for the organization. It is also a heavy burden to carry because this is a storied, historic, proud franchise. And it is also way more complex than I would have thought coming outside in. And I think I shared a little bit of this with you in prep. But, you know, outside in, as somebody who didn't grow up a fan of the team, there's a public narrative about the name that we used to have as that I would have thought was unambiguously good to have moved on from the name, et cetera, within the organization and within the fan base, right, wrong, or indifferent, a much more complex, contradictory picture. And so the idea of unifying a fan base, many of who have deep emotional connections to the old moniker, irrespective of how I or others might feel about its connotation and how it makes other people feel, is real. And you have to navigate that with your fan base. You have to try to preserve history without bringing forward the things that we don't want to bring forward in it. And that is a really tough needle to thread, especially when you're staring that down after a season where you didn't make no damn money and you're trying to rebound, right? It's a very complex problem from a psychographic standpoint, and it's already a massive marketing endeavor. And so, you know, for me, you know, I think, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And, you know, that first bite is what you would expect. We're getting data. We are trying to understand our current fan base. We're redoing our customer segmentation. We're really trying to understand them in a deep way. What do they care about? What sort of image do they want their club to represent? We're also looking and have done a deep dive and are continuing a deep dive in lapsed fans, those who have left in the last decade. Why have they left? What are the driving forces that would bring them back? How do they interpret the brand and what it should mean and stand for? And then we've done some analysis around what our future fan base might be like. And newsflash to everybody else, it's more female. It's more diverse. It cuts actually across age demographics. It even has a little bit of an international flair. And as we look at those segments, what do they want to stand for? What do they want the organization to stand for? And so we're doing a bunch of research. We've received an inbound of something like 10,000 submissions of name recommendations from folks through our portal, through our WashingtonJourney.com portal. And so we've got some AI and machine learning capabilities helping us sort through that and make sense of that. We've gone in depth with several thousand of folks in these groups, the way I told you about. And then we're getting ready with a top-end firm to launch a bigger fan-facing approach, because we want it to be very open. Because I don't think we're ever going to get to a place where everybody loves the new name we come up with. But what we want, success for us, is everybody in our current, past, and future fan base to feel like they were substantively engaged.
Yep.
And that includes alumni and others, that they were heard, that their thinking is found and woven somewhere into the new name, brand, and identity, and that there's a point on which they can anchor so that we can start to build a unified fan base with new rituals and a sense of history. And so that's a little bit about how we're approaching it now, but we're moving quickly because one thing that did come through in the research is people don't want to be in limbo for too long. That came out loud and clear, and so we're moving really quick.
Listen, I used to own a company called Turnkey Intelligence, and we did the voice of the fan for the NFL study for 15 years. And we helped Arthur Blank do the rebranding of the Falcons. They didn't change their name, but they wanted to change their marks, their colors, and other things. And we had 4 or 5 agencies working on that. It's a big job to do that. Are you working with a McKinsey? Are you working with other agencies to help you pull it all together?
Yeah, we've had a few agencies help us along the way already on the front end research around segmentation. So we're getting support there from a couple of different folks, including the NFL's league office and the sources in the league office. And then, we are getting ready to launch our bigger effort with a major marketing agency that's going to help us end to end in this process. Yeah, definitely not a burden we can carry on our own as we're trying to just, keep things afloat.
Well, and then the next big one that's coming right down the pike right after that one is a new stadium. And it's been talked about. It's clearly something that's kind of been on the drawing board for a while for your franchise. So you've got that on your plate. What can you tell us about where that's at?
Yeah, where we're at in that stage is really around aligning around the vision and finding out what help we need to accomplish that. Because again, it's not something that our current business can bear up under. You need help to get it done. Our lease on our current stadium is up in 2027, and that sounds like a long time, but stadiums, they don't pop up overnight. You don't put the seed in the ground and pop up a stadium. All right, so we are really focused right now on aligning around the vision so that when we can move swiftly. And what we've shared with anyone who will listen is that we've been calling it a venue because we think it is more than a sports stadium or a sports facility. It should be the driver of a robust events business for us. And we want to make rapid progress over the next 7 years on building our own internal capabilities on having an at-scale events business so that we are ready to have a 365 days a year robust business in that venue. Secondarily, it should be a retail and hospitality complex that brings more economic opportunity to the entire area, retail, park space, et cetera, that really enhances a community, creates jobs, and becomes a place that people want to be even when there's not a game or a concert or something going on. A place I want to drive with my kids on a Wednesday afternoon for dinner or Wednesday evening for dinner, right? That's the type of construct that we want to build. And that's a great commercial play for us, but also a major economic driver for the region. And that's really, when it gets to the crux of it, the exciting part of it. Yes, it's a venue. Yes, it's a commercial venture. But for me, given my background and the things that I've cared about, my passion, this is a driver of economic growth. And we're going to do this venue, and Dan and Tanya, our owners, are committed to this, with inclusion principles built into it. So that means, we're going to spend a couple $1 billion doing this, right? That means a substantial amount, hundreds of millions of dollars going to Black-owned, brown-owned, women-owned, veteran-owned businesses. And not in the nominal bullshit sort of way, but in the substantive way where they are getting real work and being able to grow at scale so that there are more businesses of scale that can do this sort of work over the long run. And we're already doing well on that commitment, even with our early work in this space. The second is a venue and a complex that meets the needs of the community in a very direct way. We don't know where it's going to be. We have no idea yet, but we know wherever it is, let's say there's a need for K-8 educational resources. Well, why wouldn't we actually be able to provide that through the physical infrastructure of the venue? So elementary and middle school kids from the neighborhood can come into our venue for school Monday through Friday. And that is their space. There's a sense of shared ownership of that space, that our very infrastructure is being used to drive greater equity and opportunity in the communities in which we exist. And so at that vision level, and of course, there's all stuff on the venue itself we won't bore you with. There's vision of what's the capacity and what do you do about premium, all that stuff. We're thinking about that too. But that bigger vision is where we're at right now. And that's something that we'll refine over time before we, even have the opportunity to put a shovel on the ground.
I mean, what I think of is alignment, because you are aligning the new name that's coming with the new stadium and the new venue and the new real estate around that. That's going to all be aligned in a very inclusive way. It sounds like you guys are pulling that all together. And, in Washington, D.C. and the surrounding areas, it's one of the great markets in the world, frankly. You're living in the capital of the free world. So good luck with all of that. You did mention the name Dan, for Dan Schneider. And I know there's a lot of people always curious about what's it like to work for Dan Schneider. What can you share with us about Dan?
Yeah, so first of all, I took this job in large part because of the conversations I had with Dan and Tanya. And they're very much a team, by the way. Dan and Tanya are a team. They work together in tandem. They push one another. It's actually pretty cool to watch. But in the interview process, they were very open and transparent about where they felt the organization was and where they felt it could be. And, they were very vulnerable. They shared, the idea of the decisions they would have made differently. They shared past mistakes. They anguished over things. And that was not what I expected. And it compelled me to be vulnerable as well, to talk about my mistakes, my decisions that I would have made differently in the past. And we realized that we were going to be able to work with one another in an open and transparent way. And it also gave me confidence that they also were going to give me the autonomy to do what I needed to do. And that is absolutely borne out to be the case. Do we debate? Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We debate intensely at times, but it comes from a place of mutual respect. Ultimately, they've defaulted to my decisions in every single case, and I have not been right every time. And credit to them. Credit to them. They have not rubbed it in my face. They've been gracious. But there are a couple early decisions I won't go into because they're fairly confidential. But I was like, you know what? I just don't see that in the data. I just don't see that. They're like, all right, you should trust us, but okay, have at it. 2 weeks later, like, oh my gosh, Dan, Tanya, you were 100% right. But they've been great thought partners. They've given me the leeway to do what I need to do. And there's a reason Dan is a billionaire too. Like, he's actually a very smart and astute business and marketing mind. And I really love drawing on that, just getting him waxing philosophic on a topic. I get a ton of great ideas. So it's been great. I think, and he's done the same thing for Coach. Coach has been able to lead a playoff run with a really young squad because he just said, do your thing.
A lot of times when you think of management, people tend to think of managing people below you, but the reality is the job that you sit in, a large part of what you're doing is making sure that ownership is, engaged in what you're doing at the right and appropriate level. Right. Some owners, want to be involved in every single decision and micromanaging. Other owners, they don't want to be involved at all. And so there is a right level, and every owner's got to try to figure out where that is. And you've got to help them figure that out. Yeah. For all the younger listeners today, give us a little sense of, how to not only how to manage a billionaire, but how to manage ownership in a way where they're at the appropriate level of involvement, where they're getting a voice, but they don't have to be involved in every decision.
That's good. This is where professional services really help me. Being a former consultant, that's exactly how it feels. It's like Dan and Tanya are my longtime closest clients that I had when I was a partner at McKinsey. And what makes those relationships work well are three things. The first is a baseline understanding together, full alignment on what you're trying to accomplish. If you all have aligned on the goals, both near term and long term, it is so much easier to navigate any friction, any conflict, whatever it is, because you can always go back and say, oh no, we are trying to have a stadium that is 80% full of our fans, not opposing fans, with this sell-through rate, and that's our goal. We've all aligned on that. Here's where we're headed. Or, more aspirationally, we have aligned on the fact that we are going to have the best place to work in the Washington, D.C. metro area from an organizational health and culture standpoint in the next 3 years, right? When we align on those goals, there's always a soft landing pad to which to retreat and land on when we have disagreements or when we need to talk through difficult topics. So I think that is key. The second thing is understanding what drives them. Understand what drives them. And I won't share because it's usually quite personal. But understanding what drives them, and everybody's different in their motivation. Some people it's mission to the world and society. For other folks, it's their family. For other folks, it's creating generational wealth that they can pass on economic security. For others, it's more reputational. You need to understand what are the main driving force. I would call it sources of meaning for folks, and use that as the filter through which you explain your strategy, and you can help them see how everything ties back to that sort of core source of meaning. I think the last one is putting structure around the relationship. I think if you have regular touch points that are expected. If you come, you don't have to come with a, fully fleshed out agenda, especially if they're more of a creative type and they want a free flow, but you need an objective each time you get together in some way to make sure that there's some structure around the conversation. Then it ends up being a very productive relationship and you feel like everything is moving forward at different times. And those are just like professional services, consulting type principles, but they really, really have helped us get off to a smashing start.
I mean, I think actually those principles would apply for anybody in managing a close relationship like a boss or even down. Align your goals, make sure you've got the goals aligned perfectly. Number two, understand the motivations of what the relationship is, especially if it's your boss. What's driving them, what's motivating them? And then number three, getting a little bit of structure around there. How often are we communicating? How do you like this information? Is it data visualization? Do you prefer words? All of that is really key, I think, to managing a relationship with a boss. I've got one little quick question for you. Then I want to pivot over into something that's a unique part of your life, which is the divinity theological piece, which is very unique. But before I do, it says on your LinkedIn page that you could share a good bourbon or a good scotch. Well, how do you define what a good bourbon or a good scotch is?
So I like bourbon, scotch, whiskey that has some unique aspect to it. So like sort of, like there's those that are, unique. Like from one of my favorites bourbons is a bourbon called Angel's Envy. It's it's not as super expensive. It's one you can buy, like it's not at anyone's price range. You can buy it at the store, but it's aged in port wine barrels. And so it's got this interesting like wood flavor to it, but also it's like a little bit sweet. It's got a little bit of like this sweet musty undertone of like, like a piece of wood that's been like rotten with wine in it. And it's just like this interesting flavor to it. I like Whistle Pig whiskey from Vermont, and that one's more nostalgic. We ski at this resort called Stowe in Vermont, and the Whistle Pig distillery is not far down the street. And so I like that one. It's got a neat flavor that reminds me of getting warm in the winter. There's a couple scotches that I really like as well. And in those, I just really like those that go hard into the smoky flavor, where it's like, nice. I'm like begging for a cigar to go with it, because it just needs to go together. And then my wife doesn't let me. So yeah, I'm a bit of a bourbon and whiskey file. I enjoy it a ton, but it's all about the unique character and sort of, I don't know, what it means to me, where I first encountered it, that sort of thing.
Awesome. So you have a little bit of a background and certainly a history on the divinity side, as a student of theology. Let's put it that way. What can you share with us about that? Because it seems to have influenced you as a leader, you as a culture creator, you as a leader of people. Tell us about it.
Yeah, that's good. I didn't grow up a person of faith. I converted to Christianity in college. And when I was in the NFL, my first couple off-season internships was taking theological courses. So I learned hermeneutics. I learned exegesis. I just learned how to read scripture. I learned historical context about things. And a little bit of it is I'm intellectually curious in general. I'm a nerd. But also I was a new person of faith in my 20s and wanted to I just wanted to eat it up. I just wanted to eat it up. And I think the perspective that it helps me with from a day-to-day standpoint, probably more than anything, is it gives me a better ability to release the uncontrollable. For me, there's a theological founding that there is a greater purpose at work, that the universe is moving things towards a benevolent cause and a good outcome for us as individuals, and somehow for us as individuals collectively as a society and a world. And even though that benevolent and good outcome might not be recognizable at any given point in time, we're moving that direction. It's like Dr. King said, the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, right? Like there's this lean. And that comes from my theological understanding and my grounding and my faith. And And in that, when shit is just hitting the fan, it gives me, when I'm on top of it, the ability to sit, be calm, to be measured, to make the decisions I can make, to actually look at the data instead of getting up in my feelings or being knee jerk. When, on a good day, it's not every time, but that meditative practice, that prayer, whatever it is, it draws me into that place where I'm able to do that. And that's really important for an organization. And I think it's really important for our organization, where depending on the day, we'd be getting hit out of left field with something. We are still in our journey out of the woods right now from a health and culture standpoint. And so it really helps me to do that. And it also helps me to bounce back from failure. Because I think my theological tradition is one where I don't expect people to be perfect. And I tend to hold myself to a standard of perfection until I get into my faith space and I'm reminded that I'm flawed, that I won't nail it, and that those benevolent causes and the move of the universe is going to make up for my gap at some point.
I mean, it's a little bit like being a player in a sense, because you haven't got time. If you blew a play, there's another play in 30 seconds. You got to get back up, or you got to get back in there. And so you can't really get too down if you make a mistake, and you can't be afraid of making a mistake.
That's right.
You can't really play defensively like that. You've got to just keep going. Okay, I made a mistake. Time for the next play, right?
Yes, that's right. You got it. We say flush it. You had to flush it. And that's what you have to do. I might argue we were more so compartmentalizing in an unhealthy way, but it worked. You just put it out your brain. You'd be like, yeah, I just fumbled, but I'm still the greatest running back ever. Let's go.
Well, but it does sound like that you've been grounded with this, because it's given you the security in yourself to be able to realize that you've made a mistake, but that nobody's perfect. And so it's time to get back up again. And that kind of grounding, I think, is what your employees really want from a leader, right? They want a leader that's got that's solid, and that isn't up and down like a roller coaster, but is really, really solid and expects them to be like that too. So
yeah, I think the best leaders I've ever worked for are those that can absorb chaos and transmit peace. Transmit peace and structure. And on a good day, I hope that's what I'm able to do. And my faith helps me do that, because I know when I exude anxiety, everybody catches it. It's real. Anxiety is real contagious from a leader. And I don't find anxiety to be very helpful. Urgency is helpful. Anxiety is not helpful in accomplishing what we want to accomplish.
Any book that you've read recently that you feel would be of interest to people? You can think about that. I was going to ask you about either.
I got it right here. I got it right
here. Okay. A book and a movie were the two I was going to ask you that.
I will give you 2 in 1. How about that? I read a Tolkien book a year.
Nice.
One of them a year. And I read it really slowly just because I don't have time and I cut stuff off. I'm like, I didn't make it through last year. This is how far I got in 2020. But I love the epics. And it could be a modern epic like a Tolkien or a C.S. Lewis or something like that. Or it could be something further back like the Odyssey or something like that. But I think there is something captured in the epics around human nature, the how to navigate, dumb luck or the malice of the gods. And there are deep truths that have been carried through history that when we read those, just like get in your soul in some way. And so I like those that follow the hero's journey, that have pain associated with them. I love it. I love it. So that's what I would recommend. Get out of business world a little bit and get in touch with the deeper human truths that unite us.
All right. So sort of final series of questions and topics before we take some questions from the audience. And I kind of save this for last just because I look at you as a real pioneer in a way. So I want to talk about some of the social justice stuff that's going on, in the league for sure. In the country, in the world, and then just if you could give us your own personal perspective, because we haven't had, this is a shame to say this, we haven't had a president of an NFL club be a person of color before. So
Right.
you are a little bit the Jackie Robinson in the NFL, at least on the business side. So I know that's a very heavy thing to lay on you, but what can you share with us about that? Because that really interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think, number one, I'm super proud of how the dialogue has evolved over time. When I was a player, we weren't talking about stuff like this, and the credit goes to the folks who sort of took the early lumps on this, Eric Reed, Colin Kaepernick, those folks in leading the charge to elevate this into a national dialogue. And it was messy, continues to be messy. You could argue distracting and all sorts of things, but I think it's hard to argue that it hasn't been a net positive for sports in general and the nation and the world more broadly. Frankly, you got Premier League soccer players still kneeling at the beginning of every game. And so I think it's been unambiguously positive, even if messy and controversial at times. My perspective is this: the players, at least in the NFL, have developed a keen understanding on what it means to elevate the voices that have been historically muffled on topics like racial justice. They know how to drive and promote the dialogue. We are at an inflection point where me, as an institutional leader and someone who is also aligned with the cause of racial equity, to actually help move it from dialogue, narrative, publicity, which is really positive, to shift to structural shifts. How do we get capital flowing differently? How do you get policies changed that are unambiguously good in legislature? How do you use your influence and your capital to provide your resources to provide opportunity for others, So we're trying to, I see my role as an ally in that cause, to use the structural levers we have to make a difference. An example is, we led the charge in our area to use our venues as voting sites, as super polling sites, as registration sites and super polling sites. And one of the great stories from our organization is the day that the last day of voter registration in Virginia, the voter registration system went down. And we were able to, on site at our facility, register hundreds of people to vote in Virginia, because we had the paperwork there, and then we drove it to a place where we could submit it online, and we were able to be there for our community in a real way that was substantive, and I believe made a real difference. Our players, they caught the bug after an internal meeting that Coach Rivera led, and he's a remarkable leader on this topic, by the way. If you haven't heard him talk about his own evolution on the topic of racial justice and how he thinks about it, you gotta just Google some stuff that he said. And when we got into, when they got out of that meeting, they said, well, we want to do something working collaboratively with police forces to understand how policing practices can get better in our area. And they worked with, Fairfax County Police and Loudoun County Police and said, you guys have some great ideas. We want to go with you to the Virginia State Legislature and promote these ideas. And they were part of a broad coalition of community leaders, business leaders, law enforcement, and others who got into the Virginia legislation, a new bill passed around new police reform practices in Virginia. And now the guys are ready to go do the same in DC and Maryland. And so that's the way that we help put structure around the energy, the insight, and the leadership of our team members. And that's how I see our role.
Kelly?
Thank you so much, Jason. We do have a couple questions from individuals who are a member of the Assembly. And so the first question we have is from Jaquise M. from the Los Angeles Rams. He's curious about, what is your strategy in reaching the Generation Z, given the gap in fan presence?
It's an interesting one because, most of us, by the time Generation Z is buying season tickets, we're all gone, right? So you have to think about the long term of the organization to make yourself care, but we do. The main lever in our strategic approach is leveraging our content studio as a conduit to Gen Z. And you may have seen it, our content studio has gotten a bunch of awards this year for what they've done in social media, what they've been able to do in peripheral programming. But we are creating content that is related to the Washington football team, but peripheral. We have a show called The Lab, led by a famous gamer, Anto DeBoss. And he is the host of that show, and it talks about esports and gaming and the intersection with the Washington football team. It features players and their gaming excitement and passions. And it is a way of reaching a different demographic that now engages with our brand in a new way. We have another one called The Fit, which is all about fashion with heavy hip hop influences. So it's about fashion, it's about music, and it's about showing our players and their particular fashion, talking about new sneakers as they're released, and tapping into an aspect of that culture that wouldn't normally come through a Washington football team platform. And so we're building a set of folks who engage on social, engage on these other platforms, and engage on these topics. And then we are finding the aspects of our brand, our products that resonate with them, and starting a relationship with them at that level. And so we're really leveraging our content studio right now. And there are other things that we'll be able to do. You know, Hugh, who's on the line here, as we think about the events that we bring into our venue, the current one and the future one, if those are targeted towards a demographic that is Gen Z or younger or more diverse or whatever it is, what are the touch points we have with them when they come into our venue, unrelated to the event they're there for, that ties them back and gives us a probability of later engagement around the football team. Those are the types of things that we're trying to think about now, and we'll do more and more. But you know, first thing we got to do is get back everybody in person. Ain't nobody gonna have to. That's the first thing. But after that, that's what we're gonna do.
Awesome. And so Laura Dixon at the San Antonio Spurs has a two-part question here. And one is, you talk about this culture building. Who has been your mentor and coach throughout the way? And then where also are you spending your time? Like, we know you like bourbon and scotch, but how else are you keeping yourself whole?
Oh, good question. I'll start with the last one. I spend a lot of time just playing with my kids. We will have the lightsaber battles. We're a Star Wars nerd household. That's another epic, you know, set of things that I love. I take in a lot of Star Wars stuff, comics, cartoons, Mandalorian, TV series, all of that.
Love it.
So I've got all my nerd out stuff. So I have my nerd out stuff that I engage in. You know, and then in normal times, I like to go out and spend time with friends, like go for a hike, go to the bar, like whatever it is. I can't wait for normal stuff to come back. But for now, it's been kids and, you know, a little bit of reading and stuff around the house, and definitely bourbon. And then mentors. You know, for that one, I have a wide variety of mentors, you know, and they range from a variety of different folks. You know, my cousin, who's, you know, 30 years older than me, that I grew up with or grew up around, who knows me through and through, knows my weaknesses, and just is able to speak to me on a human level. Tell me when I'm, you know, when I'm tripping. Point out when I'm feeling anxiety and I don't even realize it. You know, I talk to her, you know, once or twice a week. There's a senior partner at McKinsey named Vivian Reifberg. She was one of the first women partners at McKinsey, and she's now a professor at University of Virginia Darden School of Business. And I will talk to her about business strategy. I'll talk to her about navigating challenges with my leadership team, how to think about building my team, just a little bit of the dark arts of being an executive. And she's remarkable with that. There's a couple guys that I think are really important role models for me. Kevin Warren, the commissioner of the Big Ten, Jim Lowry, a famous Black business leader, and Ron Parker, former NFL player, used to be the CHRO at Pepsi globally. All three are Black men who have been the onlys or the firsts in their situations multiple times. And for me, being able to talk openly about the additional burden of race, how it intersects with the work that I'm doing, the ways that the insecurities that they work their way through, and being able to have those open, transparent conversations at the intersection of race and leadership, invaluable to me. And then a lot of other people that are in there too. I talk to a lot of folks often.
Thank you. And then I'm trying to fit in 3 more questions.
Okay,
Hoping we can make it. We have Greg Z from Chicago Blackhawks is curious about your experience at the Chicago booth. What would you say was the greatest impact that had on you that really led to this moment in time?
Oh, that's a good one. I love Chicago booth. So if you're considering it, Greg, you should go. Okay, it's much. Even though I went to undergrad at Northwestern, go down south. Go down south. I alluded to it a little bit. Oh yeah, Greg. Sorry, Greg went. He says I already went. I alluded to it earlier. I think the rigor of the business education at Booth is unparalleled. Maybe only MIT, maybe Wharton, but really MIT and Booth, I'd say, have that rigor of business education where you learn how to do the math as well as do the art associated with it. And then I think it's a non-pretentious place. So you get really close with your professors. People are very open. You don't hear from, I'm sorry, I'm gonna go at you Harvard folks right now a little bit. But it's not a place where when you ask them where you went to school, you're like, well, I went to a school on the south side of Chicago in Hyde Park, like those Harvard people do. Like, you are not that good.
Exactly.
Okay. Oh, I went to school in Cambridge. Oh, okay. All right. I wonder which one it is. I went to school in Boston area. Oh, you went to Boston College? Oh, yeah. Like, come on, man. Anyway, it's non-pretentious. And as a result, I think the access you get to professors are great. I had this one conversation with a professor there who's now, I think he's now at Stanford, Matthew Jinskow. He's one of the most renowned economic professors in the world now. And at the time, he was a younger, more entry-level professor. And he was a small theater director before that, as well as being an economist, just like an interesting guy. And we had one of the most profound conversations I've ever had in my life at a coffee shop with life lessons that I carry with me today. You don't get that sort of access at places where, you're feeling yourself a little too much. So that's my commercial for Chicago booth. I loved it.
Thank you. And so I don't think I have enough time for 2, so I'll end here. We have Keisha W with the Dallas Mavericks is curious about what is your number 1 goal personally and professionally for 2021?
Stay alive. I don't know. Like I'm just trying.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to make it through. This has been, we have done a lot that I'm super proud of, but it has been hard. I'm ready to take a nap. No, truly, my personal goal is aligned with our organizational health goals as a company. I will feel like I have succeeded if we are now a place where people feel empowered, where they feel safe, where they are productive and feel like it's a great place to work. Like if we have established that, I call that a success for me personally. I align my goal with that one. I think, other than that, I just want to not make an egregious error in my first year because I'm learning. I don't want to
do no harm. Do no harm.
Exactly. It's a really low bar, Len. It's a really low bar. I'm just trying not to mess this shit up.
Well, awesome. Well, Jason, thank you so much for your time and engagement. And to those of you who are in the audience, while our classes and content will be open for a while, we are transitioning into a member-only forum. We invite you to become a founding member of the Assembly today, get on the ground floor and begin to help us shape how the Assembly grows as we move forward. If you haven't already done so, please follow us on our social media handles. Twitter is at the Pro Assembly. Instagram is Pro Sports Assembly. And you can find us on LinkedIn searching Pro Sports Assembly.